I brought my 6-month-old daughter to my in-laws for Christmas dinner. My mother-in-law said, "Leave her with us, go get the wine from the store." My sister-in-law added, "We love watching babies." 20 minutes later, my mother-in-law called panicked, "Chloe, your daughter is not moving anymore." When I rushed back, I found out the person who harmed her was. Christmas has always been my favorite holiday. The twinkling lights, the smell of pine, the joy of family gathering together, it represented everything I wanted for my own family. My husband Ethan and I had been married for 3 years, and our 6-month-old daughter Isla was our little Christmas miracle, born exactly on December 25th, making her our perfect Christmas baby for her first holiday season. The Hendersons, Ethan's family, had always been complicated. His mother Deborah was one of those women who smiled sweetly to your face while keeping a mental tally of every perceived slight. His sister Nina was Deborah's carbon copy, except 20 years younger and somehow even more passive-aggressive. His father Walter just kept his head down and went along with whatever Deborah decided. But Ethan insisted we spend Christmas with them, and I wanted Isla to know her grandparents, so I agreed. The morning of December 24th, I dressed Isla in her adorable red velvet dress with tiny reindeer embroidered on the collar. She looked like a little angel, her chubby cheeks rosy from the cold, her bright blue eyes, Ethan's eyes, sparkling with curiosity. At 6 months, she was just starting to sit up on her own and babbling constantly, filling our house with the most beautiful sounds. I'd left my job as an EMT when Isla was born, wanting to be home with her during her first year. "You ready for this?" Ethan asked as we pulled into his parents' driveway in their upscale suburban neighborhood. The house was impressive, a 2-story colonial with perfectly manicured landscaping, even in winter. Christmas lights outlined every window and door frame with precision that screamed Homeowners Association approved. "As ready as I'll ever be," I replied, checking Isla's diaper bag for the 3rd time. I'd packed everything twice: diapers, bottles, her favorite stuffed elephant, extra clothes, baby food, even her special blanket that helped her sleep. Deborah answered the door wearing a cream-colored cashmere sweater and a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Chloe. Ethan. And there's our precious Isla." She reached for the baby immediately, and Isla went to her willingly, which made my heart both swell and ache. I wanted my daughter to love her family. "She's gotten so big." Nina appeared behind Deborah, wearing an almost identical sweater in pale pink. The sisters-in-law uniform, I thought to myself. Look at those chubby cheeks. Walter emerged from his recliner in the living room, newspaper still in hand. "There's my son. And my beautiful granddaughter." His enthusiasm seemed genuine, at least. The house smelled like turkey and cinnamon, traditional Christmas scents that should have made me feel welcome. Deborah had gone all out with the decorations, a massive tree in the corner draped in gold and burgundy ornaments, garland along every mantelpiece, and enough Christmas villages scattered around to populate a small town. "Dinner won't be ready for another hour," Deborah announced, bouncing Isla gently. "Why don't you two get comfortable?" Nina made her famous hot chocolate. We settled into the formal living room, the kind of space that felt more like a museum than a family gathering place. Everything was pristine, color-coordinated, and probably cost more than my monthly salary. Isla seemed fascinated by all the sparkly decorations, reaching her tiny hands toward the Christmas tree lights. "Be careful, she might try to grab the ornaments," I warned, starting to get up. "Oh, don't worry about that," Deborah waved me off. "We raised 2 children in this house. We know how to baby-proof." Ethan shot me a look that said just go with it, so I sat back down. Nina appeared with a tray of hot chocolate that looked like something from a magazine, perfectly whipped cream peaks, cinnamon sticks, even little marshmallows shaped like snowmen. "This is beautiful, Nina," I said, genuinely impressed despite myself. "Thanks. I saw it on Pinterest. I've been practicing my presentation skills." Nina worked in marketing for some tech company and treated everything like a potential Instagram post. We made small talk about work, the weather, Isla's sleeping patterns, normal family stuff. Deborah kept Isla entertained, making funny faces and silly noises that had my daughter giggling. For a moment, I let myself relax. Maybe this Christmas would be different. Maybe we were finally finding our rhythm as an extended family. "Oh, shoot!" Deborah suddenly exclaimed, looking at her watch. "I completely forgot to get wine for dinner." "Walter, didn't I ask you to pick some up yesterday?" Walter looked up from his newspaper with the expression of a man who'd clearly forgotten something important. "Was that yesterday? I thought you said today." Deborah's smile tightened almost imperceptibly. "Well, we can't have Christmas dinner without wine. Ethan, would you mind running to the store? You know which one I like, that Pinot Grigio from the fancy place downtown." "Sure, Mom, no problem." Ethan was already reaching for his coat. "Chloe, you coming?" I looked at Isla, who was contentedly chewing on her elephant toy in Deborah's lap. The store was at least a 20-minute round trip in Christmas Eve traffic. Actually, maybe I should stay with Isla. She might get fussy in the car seat again. Oh, nonsense. Deborah's voice took on that bright, insistent tone I'd learned to recognize as non-negotiable. Leave her with us, go get the wine from the store. We're perfectly capable of watching our granddaughter for 20 minutes. Nina nodded eagerly. We love watching babies. Besides, Isla and I are becoming best friends, aren't we, sweetheart? She made an exaggerated kissy face at Isla, who responded with a delighted squeal. Something in my gut twisted, but I couldn't pinpoint why. They were family. Deborah had raised 2 children. Nina had helped with countless nieces and nephews from Walter's side. Isla seemed happy and comfortable. What could go wrong in 20 minutes? Okay, I heard myself saying. But call if she gets fussy. Sometimes she needs her special blanket, and she might want a bottle soon. Her schedule is in the diaper bag, and, Chloe. Deborah's voice was patient but firm. We've got this. Go enjoy some alone time with your husband. When's the last time you two had 20 minutes to yourselves? She wasn't wrong. Between work and the baby, Ethan and I barely had time for full conversations anymore, let alone quality time together. Maybe this was Deborah's way of giving us a small gift. I kissed Isla's forehead, breathing in her sweet baby smell. Be good for Grandma and Aunt Nina, okay? Mommy will be right back. Isla just gurgled happily and went back to chewing her elephant. The ride to the wine store was actually nice. Ethan and I talked about work, made plans for New Year's Eve, discussed Isla's first Christmas presents. It felt like the old days, when we were just 2 people in love instead of 2 exhausted parents trying to keep a tiny human alive. Your mom seems to be warming up to me, I said as Ethan parked outside the wine shop. Yeah, I think having Isla around helps. Mom always wanted more grandchildren, and Nina's not even dating anyone seriously. Ethan squeezed my hand. Thanks for making an effort today. I know my family can be. A lot. They're Isla's family too. I want this to work. The wine shop was crowded with last-minute Christmas shoppers, all of us desperate to find that perfect bottle for dinner. Ethan knew exactly what his mother liked. Apparently Deborah had very specific opinions about wine that she'd shared at length during previous visits. We grabbed 2 bottles, just to be safe, and headed back to the car. That's when my phone rang. Deborah's name appeared on my screen, and my blood immediately turned to ice. It had only been 18 minutes. Why was she calling? Hello? I answered, my voice already tight with worry. Chloe. Deborah's voice was strange, higher than normal, with an edge I'd never heard before. You need to come back. Now. What's wrong? Is Isla okay? Just come back. Right now. The line went dead. Drive, I told Ethan, my hands already shaking. Something's wrong with Isla. Ethan looked at my face and didn't ask questions. He just started the car and drove faster than I'd ever seen him drive before. My mind was racing through possibilities. Did she choke on something? Fall off the couch? Have some kind of medical emergency I didn't know about? I tried calling back, but no one answered. I tried Nina's phone. Nothing. The 5-minute drive back to the house felt like an hour. We screeched into the driveway, and I was out of the car before Ethan had even fully stopped. The front door was already open, and Deborah was standing there with an expression I'll never forget, pure panic mixed with something that looked almost like guilt. Where is she? I demanded, pushing past Deborah into the house. In the living room, but Chloe, you need to know. I didn't wait to hear the rest. I ran to the living room and found Isla lying on the couch, unnaturally still. Her little red dress was perfectly arranged, her elephant toy beside her, but her eyes were closed and she wasn't moving. Isla. I scooped her up, and she was warm but completely limp. Isla, baby, wake up. I shook her gently, then more urgently. Nothing. Her breathing was so shallow I could barely detect it. I pressed my ear to her chest, her heartbeat was there but faint and irregular. What happened? Ethan's voice was deadly quiet behind me. I don't know, Deborah was saying, her voice shaking. She was fine, and then she just got really sleepy and wouldn't wake up. I tried to rouse her, but... Call 911, I interrupted, my former EMT training kicking in. I'd left medical work when Isla was born to focus on being a mother, but muscle memory was taking over. I checked her pupils, dilated. Her skin was clammy. These weren't Simp Walters of normal infant sleep. Already did, Walter said, appearing with a phone. Ambulance is on the way. Nina was hovering in the corner, tears streaming down her face. I'm so sorry, Chloe. I'm so sorry. That's when the pieces started clicking together. What are you sorry for, Nina? She just kept crying, shaking her head. Nina, what are you sorry for? My voice was getting louder, more desperate. The ambulance sirens were getting closer, but Isla still wasn't responding. I tried infant CPR, gently pressing on her tiny chest, breathing carefully into her mouth and nose. My EMT training was kicking in, but nothing was working. "What did you give her?" I finally screamed, the realization hitting me like a sledgehammer. Deborah and Nina exchanged a look, a split second of communication that told me everything I needed to know. "We didn't give her anything," Deborah said quickly. "She just fell asleep and babies don't just fall unconscious." I was holding Isla protectively now, backing away from them. "What did you give my daughter?" The paramedics burst through the door at that moment, and I handed Isla over with shaking hands. "She's 6 months old, she was fine 20 minutes ago, and now she won't wake up. I think she might have been given something." The lead paramedic, a woman about my age with kind eyes, immediately began checking Isla's vitals. "Any medications in the house? Anything she could have gotten into?" "No," Deborah said quickly. "Nothing like that." But Nina was still crying, and the guilt was written all over her face. "Ma'am," the paramedic addressed me directly, "we need to get her to the hospital immediately. Her vitals are concerning. You can ride with us." As they loaded Isla into the ambulance, I turned back to Deborah and Nina. "I will find out what you did to my daughter. And when I do, you'll both pay for this." The ride to the hospital was the longest 20 minutes of my life. Isla remained unconscious, connected to machines that beeped ominously. The paramedic kept checking her breathing, adjusting oxygen levels, doing everything possible to keep my baby stable. "Is she going to be okay?" I asked, holding Isla's tiny hand. "We're doing everything we can," was all she could say. At the hospital, they immediately rushed Isla into the pediatric emergency room. I was left in a waiting area with institutional lighting and the smell of disinfectant, my hands still shaking from adrenaline and terror. Ethan arrived 10 minutes later, having followed the ambulance, his face pale and eyes wild. "Any news?" "They're running tests. Blood work, trying to figure out what's in her system." I couldn't stop pacing. "Ethan, your family did something to her." "I know they did." "That's impossible. They would never." Then why was Nina crying and apologizing? "Why did your mother look guilty?" "Isla was fine when we left, and 20 minutes later she's unconscious." Ethan sank into a plastic chair, running his hands through his hair. "I don't know. I can't believe they would hurt Isla." Dr. Martinez, a pediatric emergency physician, emerged from the treatment area after what felt like hours. "Mr. and Mrs. Henderson?" "That's us." Ethan stood up immediately. "Your daughter is stable, but I need to ask you some questions. We found traces of diphenhydramine in her blood, that's the active ingredient in Benadryl. A significant amount for a child her size." My legs almost gave out. "Someone gave my 6-month-old baby Benadryl?" "It appears so. Now, sometimes parents use small amounts to help with allergies or sleep issues, though we don't recommend it for infants this young." "Did you give her anything before you left her with family?" "Absolutely not," I said firmly. "She doesn't have allergies, and I would never give her medication without consulting her pediatrician." Dr. Martinez nodded grimly. "The amount in her system suggests this wasn't accidental. We're going to need to file a report with Child Protective Services, as this appears to be a case of child endangerment." The words hit me like a physical blow. Someone had deliberately drugged my baby. Someone I trusted with the most precious thing in my life had poisoned her. "Can I see her?" was all I could manage to say. Isla was awake but groggy, her little eyes unfocused but open. She was hooked up to monitors, but the steady beeping was reassuring after the erratic sounds from the ambulance. I picked her up carefully, and she made a small noise of recognition. "Hi, baby girl," I whispered, tears streaming down my face. "Mommy's here. You're safe now." Ethan stood beside the bed, looking lost. "The police want to talk to us." "About what happened?" I looked up at him, and something had changed in his eyes. He believed me now. The evidence was undeniable. Detective Sarah Kim arrived an hour later, a small woman with sharp eyes and a gentle manner that immediately put me at ease. She interviewed us separately, then together, taking detailed notes about everything that had happened. "We'll need to speak with your in-laws as well," she told us. "This is a serious matter. Administering medication to an infant without parental consent is a felony in this state." "What happens now?" Ethan asked. "We investigate. We'll search the house, interview everyone who was present, and build a case. In the meantime, I'd recommend keeping your daughter away from anyone who was in that house today until we sort this out." Ethan's face crumpled. "My own family. I can't believe. Why would they do this?" Detective Kim's expression was sympathetic but professional. "That's what we're going to find out." Isla was released from the hospital the next morning, Christmas Day. Instead of opening presents and enjoying family traditions, we were back home, shell-shocked and trying to process what had happened. My parents drove down from Portland immediately, bringing enough food and comfort to get us through the next few days. I never trusted that Deborah, my mother said bluntly as she held Isla. There was always something off about the way she looked at you. Mom, please. Not now. But privately, I was wondering if my mother's instincts had been right all along. The investigation moved quickly. Detective Kim called us 3 days later with an update. We searched the Henderson house and found an open bottle of children's Benadryl in Nina's purse, she said. We also recovered some interesting text messages between Deborah and Nina from that day. My heart was pounding. What kind of messages? I can't share all the details yet, but it appears this was premeditated. They discussed giving Isla something to make her sleep so she'd be easier to handle. Nina purchased the Benadryl that morning. The betrayal hit me like a physical pain. They planned this. It looks that way. We're filing charges against both women: child endangerment, reckless endangerment, and conspiracy. Nina's also being charged with administering a controlled substance to a minor. What about Walter? Ethan's father? He claims he was in his workshop in the garage and didn't know what was happening. We have no evidence suggesting he was involved. After Detective Kim hung up, I sat on my couch holding Isla and staring at the wall. The people I trusted with my daughter, people who claimed to love her, had deliberately drugged her because they thought she might be inconvenient for 20 minutes. Ethan took the news even harder than I did. That evening, he called his father. Dad, is it true? Did Mom and Nina really give Isla Benadryl? I could hear Walter's voice through the phone, tired and defeated. Son, I'm afraid it's true. They thought it would just make her sleepy and peaceful. They didn't realize how dangerous it could be for a baby her age. Didn't realize? Ethan's voice was getting louder. Dad, you don't give medication to someone else's child without permission. Ever. I know, son. I know. Your mother is beside herself. Nina won't stop crying. They never meant to hurt Isla. But they did hurt her. They could have killed her. The silence on the other end of the line stretched for a long moment. What do you want me to say, Ethan? They made a terrible mistake. It wasn't a mistake, Dad. It was a choice. They chose to drug my daughter. Ethan hung up, and I watched my husband's relationship with his family die in real time. The legal proceedings took months. Deborah hired an expensive lawyer who tried to paint the incident as a misunderstanding and overreaction by nervous new parents. Nina's lawyer argued that she was just following Deborah's lead and didn't understand the severity of what they were doing. But the evidence was overwhelming. The text messages showed clear premeditation. The dosage was far too high to be accidental. And both women had lied repeatedly to police, paramedics, and hospital staff about what they'd done. I testified in court about finding Isla unconscious, about the terror of not knowing if my daughter would survive, about the betrayal of having family members I trusted put her life at risk for their own convenience. They stole my ability to trust, I told the judge. Every time I leave Isla with anyone now, even for 5 minutes, I panic. They've damaged not just my daughter, but my entire family's sense of security. Deborah's lawyer tried to make me look like an overprotective mother, suggesting that Isla hadn't been in real danger. But Dr. Martinez testified about the effects of Benadryl on infants, explaining how Isla could easily have stopped breathing or gone into a coma if the dose had been slightly higher. This child was very lucky, he told the court. A few more milligrams, and we might be having a very different conversation. Nina broke down on the witness stand, finally admitting what had really happened. Deborah said Isla might get fussy while Chloe and Ethan were gone, and wouldn't it be nice if she just slept peacefully instead? She said it was just a tiny bit of children's Benadryl, like giving a kid medicine for a cold. I thought it would be okay because Deborah raised 2 kids and she seemed to know what she was doing. So you purchased the medication that morning? The prosecutor asked. Yes. Deborah asked me to pick it up when I was getting last-minute groceries. And you administered it to the baby? Nina nodded, tears streaming down her face. I put it in a bottle with a little apple juice. Isla drank it right down. She was so trusting. Her voice broke completely. Deborah's testimony was different. She tried to throw Nina under the bus, claiming it had all been her daughter-in-law's idea, that she tried to talk Nina out of it. But the text messages told a different story, showing Deborah as the mastermind who had convinced Nina to go along with the plan. In the end, Deborah was sentenced to 2 years in prison and 5 years of probation. Nina got 18 months and 3 years of probation. Both women were ordered to have no contact with Isla until she turned 18, and both had to pay substantial fines and restitution for medical expenses. During the trial, I'd learned things about Deborah and Nina that gave me all the ammunition I needed to destroy their carefully constructed lives. Deborah was president of her homeowners association and active in several community organizations. Nina's marketing job required a clean background check and security clearance. I started with Deborah's social circle. Her country club friends, her book club, her charity organizations, I made sure they all knew exactly what she'd done. I wasn't cruel or dramatic about it, I simply shared the court records and news articles about the case. I thought you should know, I'd say. Deborah Henderson was convicted of drugging my 6-month-old daughter. I wanted to make sure other parents in the community were aware before trusting their children around her. The response was swift and decisive. Deborah was removed from her position in the Homeowners Association. She was quietly asked to leave her book club. The charity organizations distanced themselves from her. Within 6 months, she and Walter had to sell their beautiful house and move to a smaller place across town, unable to face the social ostracism. Nina's professional destruction was even more satisfying. Her company had a strict policy about employees with criminal convictions, especially those involving child endangerment. I made sure her manager and HR department were fully informed about her legal situation. She was fired within a week. But I wasn't done. Nina had always been incredibly active on social media, using her marketing skills to build a personal brand around lifestyle and family content. I systematically reported her profiles to every platform, providing court documents showing her conviction for child endangerment. Most of her accounts were suspended or restricted. I also made sure every future employer would know about her conviction. Background check companies maintain public databases of criminal records, and I verified that Nina's information was accurate and easily searchable. Any job requiring work with children or a security clearance would be immediately out of reach. The family fallout was even more comprehensive than I'd hoped. Walter, devastated by his wife's actions and the destruction of his family, filed for divorce 6 months after the sentencing. He reached out to Ethan and me through a lawyer, expressing his desire to have a relationship with Isla while respecting our need for boundaries. I failed as a husband and a father, his letter said. I should have protected my granddaughter from my wife's reckless behavior. I understand if you never want to see me again, but I hope someday you'll allow me to make amends. We agreed to supervised visits with Walter at a neutral location. He was genuinely remorseful and seemed to understand the gravity of what his wife and daughter had done. Isla was cautious with him at first, but gradually warmed up to her grandfather who brought books and toys and never tried to push physical affection. Nina's life completely fell apart. Unable to find work in her field, she moved back in with Deborah in their smaller apartment. Their relationship, already strained by the mutual blame during the trial, became toxic. According to Walter, they spent most of their time fighting about whose fault everything was. Nina blames Deborah for manipulating her, Walter told us during one of his visits. Deborah blames Nina for not being smart enough to refuse. Neither of them seems to understand that they both made the choice to hurt Isla. The most satisfying part of my revenge was how it snowballed beyond anything I'd planned. Deborah and Nina's story became a cautionary tale in parenting groups and childcare forums. Their mugshots and conviction details were shared thousands of times with warnings about trusting family members with children. Nina, in particular, became an object of internet infamy when someone created a meme using her tearful mugshot with a caption, "When you drug your niece for convenience and end up with a felony record." It went viral on parenting social media, ensuring that their story would follow them forever. But the real revenge was watching their relationship with Ethan disintegrate completely. My husband, who had always been close to his mother and sister, couldn't forgive what they'd done. He changed his phone number and blocked them on all social media. When Deborah tried to send letters from prison, Ethan returned them unopened. "They're not my family anymore," he told me one night as we watched Isla play with her toys. She was almost 2 now, a happy, healthy toddler with no memory of that terrible Christmas. "My family is you and Isla. They chose to hurt my daughter, so they're nothing to me now." 2 years after Deborah's release from prison, she and Nina were still struggling to rebuild their lives. Deborah worked at a grocery store, the only job she could find that didn't require a background check. Nina had moved to another state, trying to escape her reputation, but criminal records follow you everywhere in the digital age. I heard through Walter that they'd both tried to write Isla letters of apology, hoping Ethan and I would eventually forgive them and allow them back into her life. The letters went straight into our shredder. Isla was now 3 years old, a bright, curious little girl who loved books and puzzles and asked a million questions about everything. She called Walter Papa Walter and looked forward to their monthly visits to the zoo or children's museum. She had no idea that other grandparents had once tried to hurt her, and I intended to keep it that way until she was old enough to understand. The criminal case was long over, but the civil lawsuit I'd filed was still winding through the courts. My lawyer was confident we'd win a substantial judgment for Isla's medical expenses, our emotional distress, and punitive damages. Not that Deborah and Nina had much money left to take, but the principle mattered. Ethan and I had also become advocates for infant safety, working with local parenting groups to educate people about the dangers of giving medication to children without parental consent. We shared our story, carefully edited to protect Isla's privacy, at community events and childcare training sessions. It's not always strangers you have to worry about, I would tell groups of new parents. Sometimes the people who claim to love your child the most are the ones who will make dangerous decisions for their own convenience. The most unexpected part of this whole experience was how it strengthened my marriage. Ethan and I had to work through his guilt about his family, my trust issues, and our shared trauma from nearly losing Isla. We went to counseling, individually and together, learning how to process what had happened and move forward. I chose them over you for so many years, Ethan said during one particularly difficult session. I always made excuses for their behavior, asked you to just go along with it, convinced you to give them chances they didn't deserve. I'm so sorry it took them hurting Isla for me to see who they really were. You couldn't have known they'd do something like this, I replied. But I need you to promise me that Isla's safety will always come first, no matter who's involved. Always, he said without hesitation. She's our priority. She's our family. 3 years later, Isla started preschool, a milestone that filled me with both pride and anxiety. I'd become that parent who asked detailed questions about supervision, background checks, and medication policies. The school staff understood when I explained our family's history, and they made accommodations for my heightened concerns. Deborah was released from prison around this time, and I heard through Walter that she was living in a halfway house, working at a fast food restaurant, and struggling with depression. Nina had managed to find a job doing administrative work for a small company that didn't do thorough background checks, but she was making a fraction of her former salary and living in a studio apartment. I felt no sympathy for either of them. Every time I looked at Isla, healthy, happy, and thriving, I remembered finding her unconscious on that couch, not knowing if she would survive their selfish decision. During Isla's 3rd year, I discovered something that made my blood boil all over again. While reviewing court documents for our ongoing civil case, I found out that Deborah and Nina had been telling people in their new community a completely different version of events. According to their story, I was an overprotective, unstable mother who had overreacted to them giving Isla a tiny amount of children's medicine. They painted themselves as the victims of a vindictive daughter-in-law who had destroyed their family over nothing. This revelation came from an unexpected source, a woman named Janet who had befriended Nina at her new job. Janet's sister lived in our area and recognized the Henderson name from local news coverage of the trial. When Janet mentioned her friend Nina and the crazy situation with her sister-in-law, the pieces clicked together. I thought you should know, Janet told me over the phone after tracking down my number. Nina's been telling everyone that you made the whole thing up, that the baby was just sleeping normally and you called 911 to get attention. She says the family is innocent and you've been harassing them for years. I was shaking with rage by the time Janet finished talking. Not only had they nearly killed my daughter, but now they were spreading lies to rebuild their reputations at my expense. That's when I decided to take my documentation efforts to the next level. I created a comprehensive website detailing the entire case, complete with court records, medical reports, police statements, and news coverage. I didn't editorialize or add emotional commentary, I simply presented the facts in chronological order, letting the evidence speak for itself. The website was professionally designed and search engine optimized, ensuring that anyone who Googled Deborah Henderson or Nina Henderson would find the truth about what they'd done. I included their mugshots, conviction details, and the full timeline of events from that Christmas Eve through their sentencing. I also created social media accounts dedicated to sharing the story on platforms where parents gathered, Facebook parenting groups, childcare forums, and local community pages. Again, I stuck to facts and court records, never embellishing or adding personal attacks. The impact was immediate and devastating for both women. Nina's new employer discovered the website within days and fired her, not wanting to be associated with someone who had lied about their criminal background. Deborah's halfway house coordinator saw the site and referred her for additional counseling, noting that her inability to take responsibility for her actions was hindering her rehabilitation. But the most satisfying response came from their extended family and old friends who hadn't known the full story. Ethan's cousins, aunts, and uncles began reaching out to us, horrified by what they'd learned and ashamed that they'd maintained relationships with Deborah and Nina without understanding what had really happened. We had no idea, Ethan's Aunt Margaret told us during a tearful phone call. Deborah told us you were keeping Isla away from the family because you didn't like us. She never mentioned that she'd been convicted of drugging a baby. We're so sorry we didn't reach out sooner. This opened up a whole new avenue of family relationships for Isla. Ethan's extended family welcomed us with open arms, eager to make up for years of believing Deborah's lies. Isla suddenly had great aunts and great uncles and second cousins who showered her with love and attention, filling some of the family void that Deborah and Nina had created. The website also caught the attention of local media outlets, who ran follow-up stories about the case and the ongoing impact on our family. A parenting magazine featured our story in an article about family safety, and I was invited to speak at several conferences about protecting children from trusted adults who might make dangerous decisions. The hardest part, I told audiences, wasn't just that they heard Isla. It was that they spent years afterward lying about what they'd done, trying to make me look like the villain for protecting my child from people who had proven they couldn't be trusted. Nina tried to fight back by creating her own social media accounts to tell her side of the story, but her version was so inconsistent with the court records that it only made her look worse. She claimed she'd been coerced by Deborah, then claimed the whole thing was a misunderstanding, then claimed I had somehow fabricated the medical evidence. Her desperate attempts to rewrite history just drew more attention to the documented facts of the case. Deborah, meanwhile, seemed to finally understand that her reputation was permanently destroyed. She stopped trying to contact us through Walter and withdrew from any attempt at public interaction. According to Walter, she spent most of her time alone, working minimum wage jobs and living in increasingly smaller apartments as her employment options dwindled. The civil lawsuit finally concluded around this time, with a judgment in our favor for $150,000 in damages. Deborah and Nina were required to pay jointly, though neither of them had significant assets. We put the money into an education fund for Isla, ensuring that their harmful actions would at least contribute something positive to her future. Walter continued to be a stable presence in Isla's life, and his relationship with his new wife Carol provided Isla with healthy examples of how family members should treat each other. Carol was especially good with Isla, respecting boundaries while offering genuine affection and support. "I can't undo what Deborah and Nina did," Walter told us one day as we watched Isla play at the park. "But I can show Isla what it looks like when family members truly love and protect each other." The final piece of my revenge came when Isla turned 4. Deborah sent a birthday card through Walter, begging for a chance to see her granddaughter and apologize in person. The card was covered in glittery stickers and included a photo of Deborah looking haggard and much older than her 62 years. I showed the card to Ethan, and we both agreed without discussion. I wrote Deborah a letter in response, with Ethan's full support. "Deborah," it began, "you seem to believe that saying sorry erases what you did to Isla. You drugged my infant daughter because you didn't want to deal with the possibility that she might cry for 20 minutes. You risked her life for your own convenience, then lied about it when she nearly died. You showed no remorse until you were caught, and even then, you tried to blame Nina for everything. Isla is 4 years old now. She's funny, smart, kind, and beautiful. She loves dinosaurs and fairy tales and building blocks. She trusts the adults in her life to keep her safe, something you violated in the worst possible way. You will never see Isla again. You will never be part of her life. When she's old enough to understand what happened, I'll tell her the truth about why some family members aren't allowed around her. I want her to know that there are consequences for hurting children, even when those people claim to love them. Your actions destroyed your relationship with your son, your granddaughter, and your family. You did this to yourself. The fact that you're facing consequences for your choices isn't unfair, it's justice. Don't contact us again." I never heard from Deborah or Nina after that. Walter continued his relationship with Isla, and eventually remarried a lovely woman named Carol who understood our family's boundaries and never pushed for more access than we were comfortable giving. Isla grew up knowing she was loved and protected. She knew Papa Walter and Grandma Carol, my parents who lived nearby, and our chosen family of close friends who'd supported us through the darkest time of our lives. She had no idea that other relatives existed, and I was fine with that. When Isla turned 10, I finally felt like we'd truly moved on from what happened. The nightmares had stopped years ago. I no longer panicked when leaving her with trusted babysitters. Ethan and I had built a beautiful life together, stronger than ever after surviving our worst fears. But I still kept tabs on Deborah and Nina through public records and social media searches. Deborah was working at a dollar store and living in subsidized housing. Nina had moved back to their home state and was working as a cashier at a department store, still unmarried and living alone. Their lives had been permanently diminished by their actions, their reputations destroyed, their family relationships obliterated. They'd lost everything that mattered to them because they chose to harm my child. And that was exactly what they deserved. The revenge I'd crafted wasn't dramatic or explosive. It was methodical, comprehensive, and permanent. I'd used the legal system, social consequences, and natural family dynamics to ensure that Deborah and Nina faced real consequences for what they'd done to Isla. Most importantly, I protected my daughter from ever having to be around people who'd proven they couldn't be trusted with her safety. Isla grew up surrounded only by people who truly loved her and would never put their own convenience above her well-being. That was the best revenge of all, raising a happy, secure child in a family that prioritized her above everything else, while the people who tried to harm her faded into irrelevance and regret. Some people might say I went too far, that family should forgive and move on. But those people never found their unconscious infant in the hands of family members who drugged her. They never sat in a hospital wondering if their child would survive someone else's selfish decision. Deborah and Nina made their choice on Christmas Eve when they decided my daughter's safety was less important than their convenience. I made my choice to ensure they faced every possible consequence for that decision. I'd do it all again in a heartbeat.